Welcome everybody. The third session of this literature festival is paper presentation session and presided over by Sri Anil Soodji. The writers who will present their papers are Adaniya Rita Malhotra ji from India, Mufidul Haq Sahab from Bangladesh, Mahesh Paudyal ji from Nepal. Now 15 minutes are allotted for all the participants, so please follow the time limit. First, you introduce yourself and then present your brief paper. Firstly, I request to Mufidul Haq Saab to kindly present his paper.
Thank you and good afternoon to everybody. It's my great pleasure and honor to be part of this galaxy of literature academicians and from the BIMSTEC countries, and also under the leadership of our most respected Ajit Kaurji. And I am Mufidul Haq. I am a writer and researcher and also the founder trustee of the Liberation War Museum. And we are engaged in retrieving our past and present it to our new generation. And I am also associated with various cultural movements in my country. So that's all in brief. But most importantly, we try to uphold our history, our culture, our literature, and this platform is a great opportunity for us. And also as BIMSTEC, the Bay of Bengal initiative has a great relevance. So my paper is titled Bay of Bengal, Retrieving Lost Connectivity and Lost Memory. And I have based my paper on a play, Hath Hadai, which in a colloquial Bengali, which means the merchandise of assorted goods. When people go to the market, they bring all kind of goods together. So that is Hath Hadai. In Bengali, it is Shat Shauda, and written by Salim Al-Din, a very eminent playwright of my country who died a premature death, but has left a great legacy. And I think it is very important that we could share one of his most important play with you today. So I read out my paper. I hope to finish within 15 minutes. Bay of Bengal has washed the shores of many countries of the region. Along the coastline, we find many old civilizations where people lived a life that negotiated with the sea in many different ways. When cyclonic storm hit the coast from time to time, the tidal bore followed, and the sea, forged with cruelty, devastated the livelihood of people in the coastal region. The sea also opened the path of trade with faraway land. In the old era, this was mostly coastal shipping, but the spread was far and nearby. The traders from Arab land reached Arakan and Chittagong. On the other hand, Bengali merchants known as Saudagar reached Java, Sumatra, Penang, and beyond Burma and Thailand. Burma and Thailand was the nearest outpost of trade. On the western side, from the seaport of Chola Kingdom of Chennai and Andhra up to Sinhala or present-day Sri Lanka were within the easy reach of the sailors. Large boats or ships were an instrument of trade, both regional and overseas. Syed Aziz Hussain of Vishwabharati University noted that during the 14th and 15th centuries, shipbuilding appears to have developed considerably in Bengal. He wrote, quote, "Ships were very important means of communication and transport in Bengal. They were used in all kinds of foreign and indigenous trade. Ma Huan and other Chinese ambassadors visited Bengal by sea in big ships, following a northwesterly direction via Sumatra and Nicobar Islands to Chittagong. On arriving at Chittagong, they used small boats to go to Sonargarh, the medieval capital of Bengal. The Bengali ambassadors went to China following the same route, sailing in their own big ships, unquote. Portuguese adventurer Duarte Barbosa wrote, quote, they, the Bengali, are all great merchants and own large ships of the same build as those of Makkah and others of the Chinese build. With their ships, they navigated to Cholomandar, Malabar, Cambe, Pegu, Tanasari, Sumatra, Ceylon, and Malacca. And they trade in all kinds of goods from many places to others, unquote. Along with the historical accounts, we also find various references of the seafaring people of the coastal belt of Noakhali and Borishal from Bengal. Most famous of such accounts is the story of Chand Saudagar and his confrontation with serpent goddess Manosha. Shaptodinga Madhukar was the fleet of the Chand the merchant, and the myth around his life and struggle in a way reflected the psyche of the community and experience earned in negotiating with the sea. With the advent of colonial rule, Bengal became impoverished in a quick time. The past glory of Bengal was replaced by the new reality of domination of the West in many aspects of life. The sailors of the nation lost their profession. The shipbuilding industry collapsed. Large ocean-going vessels were gone. Only the wooden boats for inland river communication survived. In the early 20th century, the sailors got employment in the steamships owned by the Britishers and other European nations. They were mostly working as boilerman, oilman, and on the deck. During the First World War, recruitment increased sharply as they were put into the risky job at the engine room, where, in case of the attack, of the torpedo attack, they were the last person to get out of the ship. The sailors got a registered book, popularly known as Noli, which became hereditary as the son or relative of the sailor could take the job producing the Noli or job book. The experience of seafaring coastal people is not known much. Hat Hadai, the play by Salim al-Din, is one of the major literary works on experience of a sailor of Bengal reaching out to the wider world. The protagonist of our study is Anar Bhandari, an ancient mariner of Bengal, an old sailor of the coastal district of Noakhali, who came back to the village after many years spent on ship, calling from one port to another. He is all alone now, living in a thatched cottage near the sea, with no worldly savings, but a lot of stories about the seven seas and many ports of call. Like the old man of Ernest Hemingway's novel, Old Man and the Sea, his presence in the land is surrounded by his past in the sea. His experience and the narrative speak a lot about the connectivity of Bengal with the wider world and how that connectivity became intergenerational and found deep place in the psyche of the community. Hat Hadai is a multi-dimensional play with a long script which may take 5-6 hours to perform. Its stage performance by Dhaka Theatre, ably directed by Nasiruddin Yusuf, was a path-breaking production, but that was a shortened version. The full text is amazing and takes us to a journey around the world seen through the eyes of an old sailor of rural Bengal. It is not only Anar Bhandari, but many other characters in the play who bring the tales from the sea and who also has a life as unstable as the rivers at the mouth of the sea. Modhu, the go-free young sailor, runs after the village girls and lures them with the dream of faraway land, tells his fiancée Hasna, quote, I want to take you to the gardens of Pegu, show you the Shoe-Dragon Pagoda, the summer palace of the king of Bangkok, unquote. The characters talk in colloquial dialect of Noakhali, difficult to understand by others. Madhu, the smart guy, uses many English words to show his wider world experience and admits, quote, I try to rectify my vocabulary, but I can't help. I have forgotten the language of Noakhali. I left home at the age of 14 and for the last 23-24 years worked as an oilman, traveled to Burma and Thailand, and lost my dialect in the process. I feel sad because when I talk with a lot of English words in the sentence, I know people laugh in the back, but I am helpless, unquote. We understand that the beauty and originality of colloquial language is difficult to translate, and this is what is lost in translation. And we understand that we are helpless as our translation failed to convey that properly. Maybe the simple translation will provide a feel of the content, which may not be the beauty of the language. Which may not be the beauty of the language. It is more true for Anar Bhandari, who sometimes used foreign words not to show smartness, but to share his folk wisdom. His narratives are truthful and fascinating. The playwright collected those from an old sailor he met at the coastal village. Anar laments to another sailor, quote, how one can forget the sea. Still I can hear in my dream the gurum gurum sound of the boiler, Colombo, Madras, Istanbul resonance, shilling and pence rings in my pockets, unquote. The other sailor tells his own story, quote, when we anchored at Bali, lot of girls with flat nose encircled us. They had scanty clothes to cover their figure. Like the pirates of the sea, they attacked us, went to the cabin of the cruise, saying, $5, $5. It seemed their body is oiled by honey, and they looted our savings and vanished into thin air, those rascals, unquote. Anar Bhandari's experience is wide and diverse. He narrates, quote, so many stories play in my mind in a topsy-turvy way. I lost a teeth at Batavia port. At Hokkaido, I left my shirt in the hotel room. In the Atlantic Ocean, we saw floating ice. What a beauty. As I remember the seafaring days, I feel life is beautiful. In death, I could not remember anything. The memories, like little fishes we caught in our childhood, remain with us all our life, unquote. Anar narrates one after another his experience. One of the experiences with elephant and tiger in the ship going to Cape Town from India. The captain came from Asia who lived in Hong Kong. There are two trainers for the tiger and the elephant named Sobers and Lorenzo. At the port of Ceylon, an elephant was boarded into their ship. The difficulty to manage the elephant in the ship has been narrated vividly. From Bombay, Karachi, and Muscat, the ship sailed for Zanzibar. The elephant on the ship became wild. Quote, everybody is in trouble with the elephant. The animal with large tooth will not take any food, make wild calls from time to time, try to free the shackles with metallic sounds. They shot the elephant with sleeping drug with their gun, but that created only temporary respite, unquote. Anar narrated many other stories which reflected the real-life experience of the sailor at various ports of call. That was the time of Anglo-German War, quote, Anar telling, we unload our goods at Port Said and went to Istanbul. The British were not in good relation with that country. The port is at the coast of Marmara Sea. Carpet and other goods were loaded. Suddenly, wireless message was received by the master and the ship sailed to Malta.
Sir, kindly
Unquote.
sum up.
It's just 2 minutes. Here I could like to read out the original text in Noakhali dialect that showed how common illiterate villagers from the shore of Bengal could negotiate with the world in their own terms. শিপ অ্যাঙ্কর করণের লগে লগে কুরুগো মাঝে সোর পড়ি গেল, কচকচা হাউন্ড শিলিং লই গেলাম, আর আমি আর রশিদ ভাই ঢুকলাম 700-800 জন কুরু নাইট ক্লাবে। খারাপ কিছু মনে করিও না, it is the rule of the sea is on the sea and the rule of the land is on the land. Anar Bhandari described the bullfight he saw in Barcelona. His ship once anchored at Rio de Janeiro. There was a time when the war between German and British ended. I'm not quoting his experience in Rio de Janeiro, but I will say that Anar finally came to realize that as we sail and anchored at different ports, I felt pain in my heart. This may be my last voyage. With my 2 eyes, I have seen the Atlantic, the Caribbean, Pacific, so many seas, so many channels, met with men of so many colors. On the sea, I have seen seagull and albatross fly. I say to me, goodbye, my ocean, unquote. Such is the narrative of Anar Bhandari, the Shareng or sailor. He represented the role Bay of Bengal and the ocean played in the life of Bengal and the regions beyond. It is time for us to take a deep look at the Bay of Bengal, and the literary, cultural, ethno-musical study can contribute greatly in this endeavor. BIMSTEC can be the right platform for such endeavor. It is time to take a new journey like Anar Bhandari always did. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Mufidul Haq Sahab. Now I request to Professor Rita Malhotra ji to kindly present his paper.
Allow me to share the screen, please.
Yeah, please. Ma'am, first you introduce yourself in brief.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Very difficult to introduce oneself, but yes, let me begin by saying that it's a privilege today to be among such distinguished personalities, and immense gratitude to Ajit ji. Thank you so much for having me. Dr. Anand put me through to you, I remember, and of course to Sahitya Academy, to Foswal. As far as I am concerned, basically I'm a mathematician by profession. My life has gone in teaching mathematics at Delhi University, and I superannuated as a principal of Kamla Nehru College, which is very close to Ajit Ji Center, just behind that, yes. And but poetry has been a passion. I think I've lived with poetry, I'm going to die with poetry. And that's all. But yes, 2007, I founded an organization called Poetry Across Cultures, where our catchphrase is one emotion, plural expressions. So I have been, collaborating with the different embassies, different countries, and we just show that how poetry has no boundaries, and we connect the poetry of other nations with poetry from India. That's what we've been doing. Thank you so much for the privilege, Ajit ji especially. And so I'll just try to kindly tell me if you're able to see it. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll just start with the title that I've taken today is Tracing the Poetic Path to Women's Empowerment. We all know that poetry is an undeniable truth, and it has a magical power that actually helps the poet to discover the locus of her true self. Because poetry entails a lot of dialogue with the inner being, honest dialogue. And but I would also say that since poetry takes its sustenance from life, we cannot say that it is only an artistic manifestation of literature that reveals a deep aesthetic construct, but it is also a bearer of social and human significance. As far as poetry and poetics are concerned, we all know that they are intrinsic to perceive the rich analytical thoughts that they encompass, most of which are relevant even today. In fact, this intellectual form of art, or let me call it the formal form of art, actually not only helps us to change the course of our lives, but it often steers us towards success. And today my focus would be on how poetry, both ancient and modern, has actually, or I would say, is a strong contender to empower the woman. The reason for this is that, every school of thought, with its abundantly resourceful, poetic, aesthetic, philosophical deliberations on various aspects of art, literature, criticism, has always enriched the discipline of poetics or of poetry. And it is one of the most powerful and transformative of the art forms. Now, coming to women's expression, we have to admit that a woman's expression is unique. Why? Because she has a unique consciousness of herself that includes her body, a body responsible for procreation. It includes her soul, and of course, enhances her spirit. And if we go into literary writings by women, especially we are referring to mature writings, we will see that usually her writing is, organic, vibrant, and pregnant with a message. Now, when I say that unique, her expression is unique, this uniqueness actually helps the woman to discover her true self. And this finally leads her to the path to wisdom. For it, because as Aristotle, we all know him as the ancient polymath and philosopher, he said that a woman's expression is unique and always, and he says that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And from this wisdom, I would say, comes that sense of empowerment that a woman discovers. Now, when we say discovering the self, I think there's a lot of deep meditation, soul searching required for that. And with conviction from a first-hand experience, I would like to say that poetry itself is a form of meditation. Why? Because it expresses meaning beyond the verbatim interpretation of the written word. So I've just taken two tercets here. The first one, as you see, it says, sense of pain intense, in dry nights, dry dreams, the day ageless. And the second one, she still searches for fragrance in the smell of dead flowers. We all know that flowers have no fragrance. So when we are talking of her searching for fragrance, we are actually talking of hope. That is why I took these two examples. The earlier one was, an expression of loss, expressed with dry nights and dry dreams. So finally, after this, I would say that poetry, after all, does what? It helps us identify our values, our vision, our aims, our willingness, our unwillingness. In one word, it helps us understand our belief system. And this is the first step to empowerment. And also women's perception. I would say through her, writings, she is changing perceptions about herself. And also because of her refined sensibility, her experience of hurt, anger, pain, protest, which she has experienced through the centuries, she is also changing the perceptions of others about women. The pace is slow, but it is happening. But what happened in the past? The woman, her intelligence, her judgment was always treated with contempt. She was not treated as an individual or a spiritual entity. Most of the time she was taken as complementing the men in her lives. She was often used as an instrument of lust. But it is very encouraging to see that in ancient India, many women, or I would say some women, especially some independent courtesans, they tried to show their courage. They cultivated their minds to an extent that they were not permitted. They defied all kinds of odds, and they actually, expressed themselves or their inner feelings, which is very important. And one name that you would have all guessed perhaps is Ambapali, the great beauty of history and ancient literature. In one of her writings, she says, she's actually talking of the inevitability of aging and the loss of fragrance of youth. when she says, fragrant like a perfumed basket filled with flowers, my coiffure, with age, it smelled musty like animal fur. And then she concludes by saying, such was this physical heap, now decrepit, the home of pains, many pains, a house with its plaster all fallen off. The truth of the speaker's word does not change. Now, what are these lines telling us? It is actually a challenge to male domination, of course, with pain, with hurt, with anger. But here she has expressed her inner feelings. And I would say this is also a desire to be liberated from her existence, which is rooted in the past. So later we see that Ambapali later in life, she actually experiences freedom when she joins the Buddhist order. That was, of course, later in life. So we just want to say that when we are actually expressing ourselves or when we are giving voice to the feelings within, this is basically, trying to understand oneself, actually being able to understand the self and to retain one's identity. And therefore, it is all leading towards empowering the woman. Now, this was, of course, reference to our past. But what is happening? Even 20th century women, they have been subjugated, they have been marginalized, and in fact, they have been shamed, they have been trivialized for portrayal, of the female experience. Now, this really saddens us. It is continuing. In fact, a major volume of women's poetry takes its discourse within a tradition of oppression. Why? Because this is what she's been living with. This has become an integral part of her. So here I have to bring in the late Kamala Das, who, wrote uninhibited, bringing out the sensuality of women, the desire of women, and she's inspired so many writers, and I have no qualms in saying that I am also one of them. In this poem, which is taken from her repertoire, just a few lines where she says, they let her slide from pegs of sanity into a bed soft with tears, and she lay there weeping. I shall build walls with tears, she said, walls to shut me in. Her husband shut her in every morning. He locked her in a room of books with a streak of sunshine lying near the door like a yellow cat for company. Now, what are these? They are compelling lines, they are powerful lines, but what are they telling us? They are not a surrender to the paradigm of everyday existence. In fact, through these lines, she is telling the woman, she's encouraging the woman not to succumb to any kind of oppression, because that way she will be in oblivion of her true self, and that way she'll disempower herself. Das herself, I would say, because of her enduring spirit, because of her, search, her quest for knowledge and truth, she came close to the infinite. In fact, if I could say, close to the Almighty. And she was one woman who stepped onto the road of empowerment and fulfillment through her writings. A similar sentiment has been expressed by noted poet Tara Patel. I couldn't find any picture of hers, but this is the cover of, the only book, if I'm not mistaken. It is called Single Woman. And she says, a woman's life is a reaction to the crack of a whip. She learns to dodge it as it whistles around her, but sometimes it lands on the thick, distorted welt of her memory. So, there are similar sentiments, and all that we are saying is that Tara Patel was an empowered woman. So it is so important that what you believe you must express in words. And here I've taken only poetry, because this is what gives an outlet. Poetry gives us that outlet for our repressed feelings, which is so important. Now, every poet, you would, agree perhaps, whenever a poet is writing, she evokes a unique culture, tradition, and practice. And together with her reader, she actually understands her distinctive heritage. This then turns into an aesthetic understanding of the world around her. And through poetry, we are capturing the world around us. And that is, I think, an important step to, enrich her spiritual self and to move towards empowerment. one name I know paucity of time, I cannot go into details, but I have to mention Amrita Pritam ji here because I've always been her admirer. And, she's been an inspiration to so many. Yes, her life's journey, there was a lot of love, true love she found, but I feel that love in Amrita's writings were actually love for the other, love for the country, love for the lost composite culture of Punjab. And with her subtle sensitivity, she, brought all this alive so beautifully. And I think her, success, her empowerment was historic. And of course, she's been a great inspiration to so many of us. So I had to mention Amrita ji. I'll move towards the conclusion. So I will just say that the whole gamut of a woman's experiences is, manifested in women's literature. But so often the woman has been excluded from literary circles, and actually, to prove in her attempt to evolve that, she can express, or she should be expressing, sometimes she has even lost her identity. She has faced so many adversities. So I think that is what we have to admire. And now I feel that in the changing world order, the woman is stepping out of her penumbral existence. She has, in fact, started questioning her own identity. She has started questioning the norms of society, the patriarchal society that we have been living in for so long. And with this, why it calls for admiration of the woman, because many of them are still doing it in the face of, a lot of obstruction, and she's always in the fear of being ostracized, in the fear of, alienation from the kin. But the fact that she's questioning everything, that, is a very important science, and I'm sure she's moving with the aim. In fact, she's using poetry, this very powerful tool of literature, with a deep sense of purpose, because she wants to be heard. And she has actually carved, I would say, a space for herself away from prevailing prejudices. And today, she seeks answers. Let me put it this way, a little poetically. She seeks answers in every leaf, every dewdrop, every petal. She seeks answers in her enthusiasm and happiness in the predicament of everyday existence. And, she has learned to actually uproot herself and create that emotional distance that is required to capture the world around her. So that is, very encouraging. So as she creates this space, away from the vortex of all complexities of life, I will just conclude with one line of one of my earlier poems where I say, a woman is no longer the mirror that only magnifies the image of her man. Thank you so much. But I'll just share an anecdote if you allow me. This poem called Bindi, as you see, there's no time to read it, but I have to share this anecdote. This was Taiwan, the festival, international festival. There were 8 of us Indians and 4 were women. And there was one secret session. It was called the Women's Secret Session, where only women poets were allowed to read, but men were allowed in the audience. And this professor of linguistics who had translated our poems into Mandarin, she saw all 4 Indian women with bindis on the forehead. And mine used to be a big one. So she said, Rita, why is it that you are wearing a big bindi and the others have small ones? So I said, because I don't want to be lost in a crowd. I want to be noticed. So she said, is it a sign of women's empowerment? I said, yes. And that is how, when I came back, I penned this poem where I take Bindi as the sign of women's empowerment. Thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rita ji.
Academy, everybody. Thank you for the privilege.
Rita ji, screen share बंद कर दीजिएगा, please. Yes. Thank you, Rita ji. Now I request to Mahesh Paudyal ji to kindly present the poem.
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon, all of you. At the very beginning, I would like to acknowledge the kindness of Madam Ajit Kaur, who invited me to join this session, and I'm here this afternoon. I would also like to thank the BIMSTEC Literature Forum and Sahitya Academy. I am Mahesh Paudyal, lecturer of English at the Central Department of English at Tribhuvan University, Kathmandu. I write fiction, short stories, poems, criticism, literature for children and school textbooks. I also do some translations. I have 13 original works and 2 translations published from India. And because Sir Mofidul Haq is here with us, I want to mention one thing which might be a thing of interest to him. 2 books by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Unfinished Memoirs and Prison Notes. These 2 books I translated from English sources into Nepali. And both these books were published by Nepal Academy. So this way, I have some very intimate literary connections with both India and Bangladesh. And it's a very refreshing thing that we scholars from India, Bangladesh, and Nepal are convening together in today's literary meet. My paper is titled Mountain and the Sherpa Worldview, a comparative reading of literatures on the mountain. So here I begin my paper, and I hope within the limit of 15 minutes, I'll be able to read it out. So here I start my paper. The thrill of transgressing into a region considered dangerous or naturally out of bound for men has always fascinated the daring and adventurous humankind. An unknown drive for playing with danger is the principle that drives the adventure industry, that is $1 million worth industry across the world today. Ever since the onset of human civilization, man has been inventing ways to conquer the unconquerable. Men taming wild animals, dangerous beasts and reptiles, climbing mountains, fading into the sea, falling off the sky on a parachute, flying into the outer space and conquering the frigid North and South poles are among the most fascinating adventurous activities mankind has taken up as a thrilling pastime. And mountaineering is one of the oldest of such pastimes. In fact, why man loves to conquer dangerous zones like the one cited above has an underpinning philosophy. If the action is not rooted on need and sustenance and is purely driven by adventurous motives, the philosophy is consumeristic. It means the dangerous zones out there challenge man's masculinity, and out of vanity, man resorts to the sport of conquering the virtually unconquerable and prove the primacy of his masculinity. I'm using men, his masculinity, things like this to ridicule, the masculine hubris. I think you are getting this point. This view is totally anthropocentric and does not do any good to nature and its pristineness. Another philosophy that explains humans' advent into the zones of danger, it pertains to the idea of sustenance. Communities traditionally living in and around the zones, they enter the dangerous realms to collect resources or to earn money to run their lives. As for example, a Majhi man entering the river has nothing to do with shoving off. In the same way, a Chidimar is a community in Nepal that hunts birds in the wild and sells the birds for running the family. So I'm citing an example. In the same way, the Chidimar going into the woods to catch birds, or a grass cutter hunting grasslands and crops with leafy branches in order to collect fodder for the animals, is driven by the imperatives of needs and subsistence. Mountain climbing is another case in point. The adventurers coming from outside the mountainous region, they tend to step onto the mountain for the thrill of the task, for making name and fame, and for testing and proving their power. One instance of this view comes from the British climber George Mallory, who said, because it is there, he was talking about Mount Everest, because it is there is the title of an article he published. Because it is there, he ought to climb the Mount Everest and conquer it. He made 3 attempts to climb Everest, of which the 3rd attempt claimed his life. Yet, his view allows us an entry into the mind of a consumer inspired by the idea of radical masculinity and consumerism. In an interview given to the New York Times in 1923, Mr. Mallory explained his view, and I quote him, "Everest is the highest mountain in the world, and no person has reached its summit. Its existence is a challenge." So in response to this challenge, people with consumeristic mentality, they take the risks of climbing the mountain for the thrill of conquering it and earning name and fame. Reading almost all the literatures on the mountain climbing and conquest by the outsiders is based on this very idea of conquest. Be it Edmund Hillary's High Adventures, the true story of the first ascent of Everest. John Crocker's Into Thin Air was a book published in 1997. Mark Sinott's book, The Third Pole, Mystery, Obsession, and Death on the Mount Everest. Ed Krasher's book, The Moth in the Mountain, Sharon Wood's book, Rising, Becoming the First North American Women on Everest, Nick Hale's Dark Summit, and Anatoly Bokryv's the book, The Climb, Tragic Ambitions on Everest. All these books I mentioned coming from people living outside the Everest zone, outside the Himalayan zone. All these books, as their titles I just read out, they suggest they are inspired by the idea of conquest. Now let's veer into a few titles written either by the natives or by those who share the natives' faith about the mountains. Jamling Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa writer in 2001, titled his memoir, Touching My Father's Shawl. The title doesn't hit anything like consumerism or defeating the Everest or claiming a title. The title itself is Touching My Father's Shawl. And I must clarify, this man, Jamling Tenzing Norgay, is the grandchild of Tenzing Norgay, the first conqueror of the Mount Everest. And he wrote this book where he claims that his steps toward the Everest are to follow his father's shawl. So these views are completely different and conflicting. Now, his spiritual tilt becomes immediately understandable right from the title of his book. Another book, The Summit of the Gods, another book is titled Summit of the Gods. It's written by Baku Yumemakura, a Japanese climber. See, he also holds the spiritual side of the mountain simply because the author herself is a Japanese citizen, an heir to the culture that regards the mountain as gods or abodes of gods. If you have visited Japan, you must have heard the Japanese say, they call the Mount Fuji, Fuji-san. Fuji-san means the respectable mountain, the revered mountain, Mount Fuji. So Fuji, the tallest mountain in Japan, is believed to be the dwelling place of Shinto goddess Konohana Sakuya Hime. Means they consider the mountains as abodes of gods enshrined, the same way as the Sherpas consider the mountains as abodes of gods and goddesses and shrines of deities. Of late, the mountain people of Nepal, who were once considered good only for mountaineering, they also have started writing books, and a few of them have written their memoirs commemorating their life and struggle on the mountain. One particular book I would like to mention is 40 Years in the Mountains, 40 Years in the Mountains by Lakpa Phuti Sherpa, who climbed the mountain so many times. And another book I would like to mention is The Shepherd of the Mountain by another man, Sunar Bahadur Gurung. These are examples of those texts that revere the mountain and they confess that they still climb the mountain because the mountain is their mother, and with the mother, they get from the mother, they get their milk and they get their fodder and food and life. Communities who move into the mountains as mountain guides or as seekers of other resources like herbs, medicinal herbs, fodders, and snowborn materials, they do not do that just for pleasure. Theirs is an endeavor of sustenance, and their action is defined by age-old, culturally defined, and geographically ordained occupations. This paper's major argument is that the Sherpas living in the high Himalayan region of Nepal climb the mountains as guides, not because they enjoy the sport or are after name and fame, but because their worldview is that to a great extent shaped by their interaction with the mountain. They were born in the mountain, they were brought up in the mountain. Their worldview is shaped by the mountain. This view of the Sherpas finds its expression in their literature, both religious and secular, both oral and written. This stands in contrast with the view of the outsiders who come to the Himalayas for mountaineering. The outsiders pose as consumers, caring very little about the sanctity of the mountains, as they are guided more by the idea of conquest. I have repeatedly said, the insiders, however, look at the mountain as a source of life, and the view is in no case anthropocentric or consumeristic. The Sherpa worldview is evident from the oral.
Maheshji, kindly some of the paper.
Yes, I'm reading the last paragraph.
Yeah, please.
The Sherpa worldview is evident from their oral and written literature, depict the mountain as deity. Just an example, the Sherpa name for Mount Everest is Chomolungma, which means the house of goddesses. They particularly believe in 5 goddesses, Tasi, Thinki, Chopan, Takar, and Jomo. And of the 5 goddesses, one of them is believed to be living in Mount Everest. Nio Lasangma is believed to be the resident deity of Mount Everest. Because the mountains are abodes of their guardian deities, the Sherpas worship the mountains. I have quoted a researcher, which I will not read. So this way, the finding can be extended to generalize the idea that the indigenous communities that drive life from nature do not harm nature consciously. They don't bear any kind of anthropocentric, consumeristic, or colonial attitude toward natural or geographical resources. By corollary, the natives are friendlier to the environment than the outsiders are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maheshji. Now I request to respected chair, Shri Anil Sood ji. Sir, kindly unmute yourself. Yes.
सबसे पहले तो मैं आदरणीय माताजी अजीत कौर जी को चरण वंदना कहूंगा, जिन्होंने एक इतना अच्छा एक प्लेटफॉर्म बनाया है, सब जगह से ऑथर्स को, राइटर्स को इकट्ठे करके एक्सचेंज ऑफ थॉट और एक यूनिटी क्रिएट करी है. एंड ऑथर, आर्टिस्ट, राइटर्स, पोइट्स, there is no boundary for them. I'll just share one small example. In 1980, I was slightly disturbed. So I read a book, Autobiography of a Yogi. Believe you me, after reading the book, my entire lifestyle changed. Whenever I talk to any artist, I find their lives are much more guiding factor than Autobiography of a Yogi. If you sit with an author and writer or an artist, and if you hear them, it's amazing. One just cannot express. I just can't express my words, but yes, it's an amazing, it's quite inspiring, and it's quite, eye-opener. In fact, in search of original stories about our freedom struggle dating back to 1905, Freedom Struggle Punjab, and recently when I went to Jallianwala Bagh, heard lot of stories, lot of names. But then I was searching for an authentic book, which was written in 1927 by Dr. S.C. Mittal, titled as Freedom Movement in Punjab, 1905 to 1929. After frantic search all over, I could get only one book that was available in US in one of the libraries, very well kept and very well maintained book. And finally, I could get that book from US. So I'll just read, this is the only book. I'll read only few, but I'll not take much time. Jallianwala Bagh tragedy. This also shows the unity of our people. This shows that how everybody was so concerned. But on April 13th, took place at Amritsar an event of great significance, which marked a turning point in the history of India. In view of the above spontaneous disturbance between the 10th and 12th April, it would not be incorrect to say that the sporadic events reminded the Punjab government about the reoccurrence of 1857. Perhaps history was going to repeat itself. On April 13th, it was Vaisakhi Day, the Hindu New Year's Day, that Dyer issued proclamation prohibiting all meetings, gathering, processions, and warned people not to leave the city without permission of the and to remain at their homes after 8 p.m. These proclamations, according to the authorities, were read at 19 places in Amritsar. According to Dyer, people were laughing while the proclamation was being read out. People were thus noticed by Dyer as behaving insolently. People were saying, this is all bluff. Dyer admitted that the proclamation had not been read out in many parts of the city. About the same time, Gurunditta a Baniya and Balu a Halwai were announcing in the bazaar by beating kerosene tin that a meeting would be held at Jallianwala Bagh 4 p.m., which Kanhaiya Lal, a very respectable citizen of Amritsar, would preside. In fact, no instructions had, however, been issued about the meeting by any Congress committee, and Lala Kanhaiya Lal knew nothing about it. Dr. Gurbaksh Rai, at present living in Delhi, has also admitted this fact to the writer. According to Justice Broadway Commission of the Amritsar conspirators, Dr. Muhammad Bashir was the main organizer of the meeting, while Dyer was in the city at 12:40 p.m. He was also informed that in defiance of his proclamation, a meeting was being held at Jallianwala Bagh that afternoon. Dyer made up his mind to strike and strike hard. According to Sir Umar Hayat Khan, it was planned to hold original meeting at Golden Temple, but the venue was changed due to efforts of Sir Sundar Singh Majithia, a member of the Imperial Legislative Assembly. The scheduled meeting was held at Jallianwala Bagh. This place was named after one of his properties, Jalis. It was not a garden in the sense, but an open space, dusty, neglected, and disreputable. It was frequently used for fairs and public meetings. Regarding the number of people assembled in the Bagh, different estimates have been made. According to the official version of the number of people assembled at Bagh was 5,000. According to the official version, in a statement made to Army Council, Dyer thought that crowd was between 15,000 and 20,000. Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya gave out the figure as 16,000 to 20,000. Congress Inquiry Committee placed the number as 20,000. An aeroplane flew over the meeting. Hansraj, who later became an approver and asked the audience not to be panicky, Pratap Singh, a bookseller, stated before the Congress Inquiry Committee, that Hansraj had put up the picture of Dr. Kichlu and said that his portrait would preside. At 4 p.m., the Superintendent Rahil informed Dyer that Mr. Lewis, the manager of Crown Cinema, had reported to him that meeting was being held at Jallianwala Bagh. Dyer reviewed his forces. Out of his 407 British and 739 Indian troops, 389 British and 382 Indian had already been allocated to various duties. Along with Jawaharlal, the CID inspector, his associates were already in the meeting in plain clothes. General Dyer marched towards the meeting place and with 2 armored cars and police car, with Rahil and Palmer with the machine guns and 90 soldiers, out of whom 25 rifles of Gurkhas and 25 Sikhs and 40 soldiers armed with only lethal arms. On the side of Bazaar, there were 7.5 feet passage to the Bagh. Because of the narrow passage, Dyer was compelled to leave these armored cars outside. Before arrival of the military, 7 speakers had already addressed the meeting. The speaker was Hansraj, Abdul Aziz, Gurbakhsh Rai, Rai Ram Singh, Dhan Singh, Abdul Majid, and Brij Gopinath. Brij Gopinath, a bank clerk, had just finished reciting his Urdu poem Faryat. As the military appeared on the scene, the meeting had already passed 2 resolutions, the first calling for repeal of the Rowlatt Act and the other condemning the firing on 10th April. Now Durga Das, the editor of Waqt, was about to speak. A wave of unrest prevailed in the audience with the shouts, "Aa gaye." Dyer ordered firing and he did so without giving any warning. He admitted that crowd was unarmed. Firing continued about 10 minutes without any break. To Arthur Swisson, from a round of firing, it may not have been longer than 6 minutes. According to General Dyer, a small amount of firing would have been a criminal act of folly. At first, the soldiers fired high, but Dyer ordered to fire them straight and low. They fired until ammunition was exhausted. It was rather difficult to know the exact number of those killed in Jallianwala Bagh. According to Dyer estimate of 200 to 300 people were killed. This estimate was based on experience in France, where one man had been killed for every 6 shots. To the Dyer, battlefield of France and Amritsar were the same. Then in a letter dated 3rd September.
Anil sir, kindly sum up the.
I am just summing up. This is the last line.
Okay.
Dated 3rd September 1999, J.P. Thompson, Chief Secretary Punjab, government gave the following figures. Now, what is most interesting part of this short writing about Jallianwala Bagh, that poets triggered the feeling of Azadi. It was Urdu poets. These were Urdu speaking people, Urdu speaking Indians, those who, triggered, those who inculcated the feeling of independence among the people. So as Dr. Rita ji had said, poetry is a very big tool. Jahan pahunche na ravi, wahan pahunche kavi. So poetry and art, these are 2 very strong languages with which they can communicate with anyone and with conviction. Hats off to artists, hats off to poets, hats off to writers. They are our real assets. They are our precious treasure. So with this, I thank you very much. And I thank Mataji Ajit Kaur ji for giving us an opportunity of coming together and to me, in fact, of hearing all of you. Thank you.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद अनिल सूद जी। आज हमने बहुत ही अच्छे 4 पेपर यहाँ पर उनकी प्रस्तुतियां सुनी और देखी। मैं बहुत ही आदर व्यक्त करता हूँ साहित्य अकादमी की ओर से और शार्क लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल की ओर से, के फोसवाल की तरफ से, कि आप सब ने इतनी मेहनत से और इतनी जानकारी से भरी हुई तैयारी की थी और इतने अच्छे पेपर प्रेजेंट किए हैं। इससे और विचारों को आगे बढ़ाने में भी एक रास्ता बनता है। मैं बहुत आदर व्यक्त करता हूं आप सभी विद्वानों के प्रति। ये सत्र यहीं समाप्त होता है। कल हम जो सेशन होगा वो पोएट्री सेशन से शुरुआत करेंगे सुबह 10 बजे। तो हम अनुरोध करेंगे कि आप सब भी उस कार्यक्रम को मौका निकाल कर देखें यूट्यूब पे। इस सत्र में हमारे बीच में आदरणीय अनिल सूद जी थे अध्यक्षता करते हुए, और मुफीदुल हक साहब, रीता मल्होत्रा जी, महेश पौडियाल जी, आप सबके प्रति हम पुनः आदर और आभार व्यक्त करते हैं। नमस्कार, धन्यवाद।
नमस्कार,
बहुत धन्यवाद, बहुत धन्यवाद,
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद
अजीत जी,
माता
बहुत
जी।
धन्यवाद।
हाँ जी।